Choose your destiny. Flawless victory.
What's going on, guys? LordKing here again, back with another UFC review show. Gustafsson vs Teixeira. It was actually a great event, to be honest, despite, again, as I mentioned in the preview, the lack of actual names. These events normally are a little bit better because people are trying to pretty much get their name onto the map. So, again, as I mentioned, the event was pretty good. Some of the key bouts that we actually had, which I will be going over, obviously Alexander Gustafsson vs Teixeira, that was the big one. We had Volkan Ozdemir, Misha Serkinov, another big one, pivotal sort of fight in the light heavyweight division. We also had Sabota, Ben Saunders, and then we had Razak Al Hassan was fighting. Then we go down into the earlier sort of fights: Hadzovic and Marcin Held, Darren Till, Ayari, and likewise those sort of lower fights, Jack Hermanson as well. I'll be going over those ones in a little bit of detail. Most importantly, though, the Alexander Gustafsson versus Gustafsson Teixeira. Now, as you can see on your screen, you can see all the results of all the fights that did occur during the night. There were a few that weren't expected and a few other ones that were, to be honest. But going over to the pre-fight issues, we had Darren Till actually weighing in at 176 pounds, so he did not make weight and had to give up about 20% of his purse, I believe it is, to his opponent. He won as it is, but still he had to give up some of his purse to his opponent. There were actually, this weekend, there were quite a few MMA events on in general. There was ONE FC, which is over in Asia, and there was also KSW as well. ONE FC, the home of Ben Askren, one of the best sort of wrestling style fighters maybe in the world. He's one of Tyron Woodley's sort of pivotal partners in training camps when it comes down to people with wrestling and things like that. He is legitimately one of the best wrestlers in the world. I think he's a 2-time NCAA champion as well as that. So he showed off his domination. There was a few other things going on at ONE FC. KSW, another promotion which Mariusz Pudzianowski actually competed in over the weekend. If you guys are aware, Mariusz Pudzianowski, the world's strongest man, maybe the greatest world's strongest man of all time, actually he won his fight as well in that KSW event. Speaking of world's strongest man, Eddie Hall is the new world's strongest man. I thought I'd drop that in before we get into the breakdown of Gustafsson versus Teixeira. 12.6k attendance at UFC Stockholm with a $1.9 million gate as well. Fight of the night, Gustafsson versus Teixeira. Performances of the night, we had Velikovic and Hadzovic. I personally think Gustafsson and Sabota should have probably been on this. I'm not sure if there is a limit to performances of the night that you can give, but I feel those two should have also been on it as well. Let's go into Gustafsson versus Teixeira now. So as you can see from the results, Alexander Gustafsson beat Gustafsson Teixeira via KO, TKO. It was a very, very dominant performance, to say the least. The strikes don't massively tell the biggest difference, as it is 108 to 62. It doesn't show the biggest sort of difference. 2 knockdowns. Gustafsson just his striking looked on a completely another level to Gustafsson Teixeira's. I mean, this was a very similar sort of Gustafsson we saw against Jon Jones when he fought, maybe even Daniel Cormier when he fought them. He was just landing these punches, I mean, just almost out of nowhere, to be honest. The sort of things that you see people doing on dummies or punch bags in a boxing gym or wherever it may be, a Muay Thai gym. This guy, he does them in real life on opponents, so it is an incredibly impressive thing to see. Now, what we can go into is actually the matchup and what the fighters did right, first of all. So what I saw Gustafsson doing, which it really interested me, to be honest, he did a lot of posting. What we call posting is putting, maybe in this occasion, the weaker sort of arm out, so your jab hand, which would be his left hand. He posted on the shoulder, which is almost, one, it's a reach finder, so he can tell his opponent is in a sort of a good range for him to land. There's another thing where you can also pull away someone's guard, which is similar to the Lomachenko sort of thing in boxing, where he almost puts his hand out and then reaches and pulls the glove down itself. You can do that with it as well. And also the posting, it almost creates a block and a barrier. If you post with your jab hand and someone were to swing, most of the time they will probably hit your arm. So it's almost a very, very good tactic to use with someone who is quite a brawler and will come forward like that very quickly. It's almost just like a handoff, as they do in rugby. It kind of creates that distance in rugby or American football, whatever you like to watch. It does create that distance. The big punch Gustafsson landed was the uppercut. That punch, he was landing at complete will. Whenever he wanted to land that, it was just unbelievable how many times he actually uppercutted Teixeira. So that was the main punch of the fight, and the reason why he was managing to pull this off so incredibly was because of his hand speed. Gustafsson probably has maybe the fastest hands in the light heavyweight division. He moves like a welterweight. I'm not even too sure what it is. His hand speed is absolutely phenomenal, and he has a technique where he keeps his uppercuts very his elbow stays quite close to his body, so the uppercut isn't telegraphed at all. He does these quite looking long rangey looping uppercuts with his where he has a very long reach as well. It kind of helps out, but he tends to do these almost bolo uppercuts, like a long ranging. If you've seen Conor McGregor fight, he does these sort of uppercuts where he swings his arm underneath and hits from a very long range. Gustafsson almost masks this by, again, posting with his arm, distracting the guard, and then comes with this long range uppercut. He has pretty much mastered this technique, as we have seen, and he did it to Teixeira incredibly well. Another few good things we actually saw from Gustafsson was his pivoting and his footwork. Now, his footwork, it does need improvement. There were a few times where we didn't see the best things. We'll go on to that into the next section, what they did wrong. But his general pivoting and footwork seemed to be quite good. This is Gustafsson's side. Now, on Teixeira's side, you can't say too much, to be honest. But what we did have was he had an incredible chin, and the heart was just phenomenal. There's not many people who are like Teixeira who can get knocked down twice and get back up and eat the sort of punches that he did. That is the best thing about Teixeira, which was great to see. Now, what they did wrong, Gustafsson, the one thing I picked from this was his fence running. When Glover Teixeira caught him into the fence, he tended to do this thing where he ran off and he ducked. He would make Teixeira may throw a punch, and then once he did, he would slip it and run off. Now, it's quite a good tactic to use. A lot of people don't like it because it classes the whole running away thing, as Conor McGregor did in the Nate Diaz 2 fight. A lot of people don't like it, but it's an incredibly effective technique sometimes, especially if you want to reset the position back into the middle of the octagon. Now, Gustafsson did this numerous times, but there were quite a few times where he would just almost pull out and just try and run off without actually making Teixeira make a move first. So it was almost a rushed sort of pivot off and running away. Now, this is the main thing Teixeira, I believe, did wrong. When he actually herded Gustafsson into the corner of the fence, which was probably the good thing to be doing, he should have, if he had maybe he didn't want to do it because he's not that good at kicking. He only threw about 10 kicks during the fight, Teixeira. But if he was a bit better at kicking, he would be able to ideally throw a head kick off to Gustafsson as he is going off. Numerous times when Gustafsson would run off the cage and try and separate from him, he would put his head down and try and slip out and or literally run off without looking. A head kick would have been the ideal situation to pretty much counter that and maybe even get a pretty glancing KO. It could have been Teixeira's night had he done that, which is a relatively obvious thing now. I think he's looked back on and seen that. The other big thing is the head movement inside of his guard. Now, this was probably the biggest thing, probably his biggest downfall, to be honest. The uppercuts, as I mentioned, were landing at will for Gustafsson, mainly because obviously Gustafsson's hand speed and his uppercuts, but also because Teixeira was not doing anything about them. He was just taking them whenever he wanted to. Now, this could be a hint at Teixeira's game. Anthony Rumble Johnson knocked Teixeira out with pretty much the exact same thing, an uppercut which came through the guard. His coaches in the corner in each round were telling him head movement, you need to move your head, but he just didn't seem to be doing it. So that was the key sort of thing Teixeira did not do, which was head movement inside of his guard, leading to these vicious uppercuts landing and eventually the KO. In terms of actual other things of this fight, I think actual ratings of each fighter's performance, I think the way Gustafsson performed was maybe the best we've seen him since his Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier sort of escapade. It is probably the best we've seen him in that sort of amount of time. So I think you have to give Gustafsson a 5 out of 5 for that. If you're doing this on the 5 sort of scale, it should be a 5 out of 5 for Gustafsson. Glover Teixeira, again, I just think he was just mismatched in this situation. He couldn't do too much apart from just run in and try and swing, maybe catching Gustafsson with a punch if he did. Oh, he did land some punches, but Gustafsson does have a relatively good chin, to be honest. So Teixeira's performance, it could have been better. He didn't listen to anything that his corner told him in the breaks or anything, so he's probably going to receive a 2 from me maybe for this performance. It could again just be Gustafsson being overwhelmingly good, but it seems a lot more to the fact because Teixeira wasn't living up to what he could do, I feel. But again, Gustafsson with an absolutely insane performance. Again, in my opinion, he should have received performance of the night as well. I believe that almost sums up this fight relatively well. On the final few things of this fight, I think excitement-wise, it was very, very good. The things that were being landed, the crowd made it absolutely phenomenal. There were a few other nice things as well. Gustafsson proposing to his girlfriend, who's also knew the mother of his child. He proposed to her in the octagon as well after the fight, which was quite a nice thing to see. In terms of reffing, the reffing for this fight I thought was very good. Apart from the one thing, maybe the corner. This maybe isn't the reffing's issue, but maybe Glover Teixeira's corner could have stopped the fight a little bit earlier, as in throwing in the towel. I know it's maybe not the best sort of decision here, and a lot of people may disagree with me, but I wouldn't be opposed against it if his corner were to pull Teixeira out of the fight and maybe the 4th round or something like that, just simply because it was a brutal one, going all the way to 5 rounds and then getting KO'd. It was quite a brutal thing to see him maybe not knowing he's not going to win. They may have been able to stop the fight earlier. Any contentious moments during this fight? The only thing I did see was the actual eye. There was an eye poke, I believe, in round 1, which I feel could have affected the fight in some ways. We've seen it happen before, especially with Tony Ferguson versus Edson Barbosa. He did I think it was a head kick on the ground, and it kind of dazed Barbosa, and then it kind of changed the outlook of the fight. Ferguson, I think he eye poked Rafael dos Anjos before. These things do matter. They do change people, and I think Teixeira couldn't actually see out of his eye. It seemed to be swelling a fair bit, and he couldn't actually see is what he was saying. So it does make a difference. I think Gustafsson would have won anyway, as I mentioned in my prediction. I do think he would have won anyway, but these things do make a difference. So that was probably the only contentious moment, and then possibly stopping the fight earlier on, as I just said. What is next for each fighter? Well, Glover Teixeira, he is getting on a little bit. I'm not sure if this calls for retirement, but maybe he may have to be looking into sort of closing down shop, in the sense where he is not going to be getting that another title shot and not going to be breaking into the top sort of 3-2 anytime soon, especially with Gustafsson looking so good, the return of Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier being champion, and then even funnily enough, Anthony Johnson posted a tweet saying he's getting the itch back and he wants to show these guys how to throw a proper uppercut, seeing as he knocked both of them out, Glover Teixeira with an uppercut. So it would be quite funny to see if he came back. But again, it just kind of shows Glover Teixeira, he may not be in the right sort of place anymore, but he's still got some good fights in him, I believe. Maybe him versus Jimmy Manuwa, that could be possibly a good fight, or the big test for Jimmy Manuwa in the future. Alexander Gustafsson, what I see for him in the future is a rematch with either Daniel Cormier or Jon Jones, the one who wins at UFC 214, I believe July 29th, I believe. The winner of that, I think, has to fight Alexander Gustafsson. He went to split decisions with both of them, and he arguably won both of the fights as well, being the only man who's ever made Jon Jones look mortal, to be honest. Probably the best fighter that I've ever seen in my lifetime being Jon Jones, and Gustafsson took him the distance and almost won the fight. So that would be the logical next move for Alexander Gustafsson. Another thing that actually happened was, in the post-fight press conference, Gustafsson actually kind of called out Jon Jones, gave him a little bit of trash talk, actually, basically saying how he probably is the best fighter that's ever been in the UFC, but he doesn't actually really respect him because of all the antics that Jon Jones has gotten involved in outside of the UFC. He doesn't really respect him as a person, doesn't say he's a nice person either, so he will be rooting for Daniel Cormier in Jon Jones-Daniel Cormier's rematch. So again, it kind of adds into that little bit of trash talk we don't normally get to see from Gustafsson, and I enjoyed it, to be honest, quite a lot. It was quite nice to see Gustafsson in that sort of light. That wraps this fight up. Just very, very briefly, just a few more minutes, I can go into the other fights that I thought were of relatively good interest on this card as well. The main of which being Oezdemir versus Cirkunov. Now, this fight was over incredibly quickly. It happened very quickly. Cirkunov basically came out of the gates trying to swing, and they both were swinging again quite hard. And this is nothing that Oezdemir has ever seen before. He's trained, is one of the best sort of kickboxing practitioners in the UFC, the light heavyweight division at the moment. So it's something that nothing that he hasn't seen before. Cirkunov came out very, very quick, trying to put a lot of pressure on, basically chasing him down with these blitz sort of maneuvers. And then it ended up in a very, very odd KO victory for Oezdemir, where he basically clipped him right behind the ear, but it looked like an incredibly weak punch with it was such a short punch. There was no movement on it, to be honest. You'll see right now what I mean. It was a very, very odd sort of punch, and the speculation as to why he actually knocked him out so easily from it was, one, because it was perfectly behind the ear, and then also two, because where Serkinov's head was posted against the cage, there was no room for him to actually move and kind of distribute the impact. Where it was actually in a stationary place, it was like the head kind of absorbed absolutely everything, which is what a lot of people have speculated on this. In terms of the fight actual overall, you can't really say too much on it because not much actually happened apart from the actual knockout itself. Neither fighter did too much wrong and neither fighter did too much right apart from the counter and walking into the counter. It was a relatively nothing much happened because it was over so quickly. After the fight, Oezdemir, he has basically called out Jimmy Manuwa and said that is his big test that he wants. Serkinov, I'm not too sure how he's going to bounce back from this because, again, there was so much controversy where Oezdemir was actually ranked higher than Serkinov before the fight, and Serkinov felt like he should have been ranked higher considering he had much more fights than Oezdemir as well in the UFC, and he did better than Oezdemir in the UFC. So all this controversy is now settled. Oezdemir is the better fighter technically on paper because he has won this victory, he's got this victory, and now he has called out Jimmy Manuwa for his first fight, probably at UFC 214. Moving into the next fight that we have, Hermansson defeating Nicholson via TKO stoppage. This was, again, very, very one-sided. Hermansson basically took him down, took his back, and then pretty much put his hooks in and just started doing some relatively vicious ground and pound from behind. So he flattened him out on his stomach and he couldn't really do anything where he was on his back. He couldn't get him off, and Hermansson got picked up a relatively easy win for him, again showing why he is one to be considered as maybe a big upcomer in the future, doing it for his home fans in UFC Stockholm. So again, a very, very good victory for him. Next fight going into was Veljković defeating Nico Musoke. This one was a relatively odd fight in the sense it was pretty back and forward and relatively even, to be honest. And they both gave it as good as they got, but I thought Musoke was going to win this, and then it came to about maybe 30 seconds left until the fight finished, the end of round 3, 30 seconds to the end of the fight, and Musoke basically walked forward and Veljković hit him with, I think it was a strong right hand, and Musoke was just dancing on his feet. It was the craziest sort of chicken dance I've ever seen in terms of he was struggling to stand up. He was out on his feet pretty much, and then all it took was a tiny flick pretty much from Veljković to push him over and basically get the finish on the ground as well. That was an incredibly good performance and it earned him performance of the night. Final fight, which was the very first fight on the actual UFC prelims, was Damir Hadzovic versus Marcin Held. Marcin Held was pretty much dominating this fight in terms of he would take him down and get on top of him and basically dominating the jiu-jitsu sort of department. He wasn't actually submitting because there was some great defense from Hadzovic, but I think what was happening this whole time is Marcin Held was almost telegraphing his takedowns. So when it came down to the time when he went for that fatal takedown, he tried doing this sort of Imanari roll type thing, which is basically where you roll without doing a takedown. You basically roll onto your back to grab their leg. He basically tried doing that, and it resulted in him getting kneed, as you can see on the screen. It was a very, very, very well-timed knee and made Hadzovic very deserved of the performance of the night bonus as well. So that was a great way to start off the actual card itself. An incredible knee once again. That wraps up the UFC Stockholm review, guys. I hope you can tune in for the next one, which is hopefully going to be very, very soon, simply because it is Aldo versus Holloway UFC 212. If you can tune in for that as well, the preview, which will be absolutely great because I'm incredibly excited for that event as well, and there's a few things that need to be discussed specifically on that. In terms of UFC, the people on this card, we're looking forward to Gustafsson rematching against Jon Jones or Daniel Cormier. That will be absolutely phenomenal. Please tune in to my next videos, guys. Also take a look at my Xenoverse, my online ranked random battles as well, and then write down who you want me to be for my subscriber choice challenge. That wraps this up, guys. Thank you as always for watching my videos. Please like, share and subscribe. I've been LordKing. Goodbye.